We've got Sooners drafted to the NFL. We'll talk about favorite landing spot, biggest surprise, our takeaways from the 2022 NFL draft as it relates to your Oklahoma Sooners on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Locked On Sooners podcast. Thank you for joining me. My name is John Williams. I'm also joined by Josh Helmer of 94.7 The Ref in Norman. You can hear him Monday through Friday from 9 to noon over there. Also on the 1400 Sports Talk app as well. Follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. Josh, how was your weekend? Did you get any football action in?
Oh, lots of NFL draft, watch partying, by my lonesome, but enjoying it all the same. I thought it was great. I thought it was a fun draft. Obviously, we're going to dive into it, but why did it take so long for some Oklahoma Sooners to get drafted? I thought that was one of the big takeaways in Sooner country. But just in general, I thought this NFL draft, I found just as a viewer, a little more enjoyable. Talking specifically about the first round, I thought that those first couple of picks in the first round really, really moved. If one of my complaints in the past has always been, oh my goodness, okay, they're on the clock, but it's 15 minutes before we get a pick made. And that wasn't really the case in this year's first round of the NFL draft. So I enjoyed that part of it. But man, a good weekend. How was yours?
Yeah, it was the same. I mean, just following along the NFL draft amidst all the different, family responsibilities and different things we had going on this weekend. It was a busy weekend, but it was a great weekend, and a great weekend for Oklahoma Sooners, who had 7 players selected in the 2022 NFL draft, which, according to CBS Sports, is tied for the 5th most amongst all college football programs with your Alabama Crimson Tide. They came in behind Georgia, who set a record with 15, LSU at 10, Penn State at 8, and Cincinnati at 9. So the Oklahoma Sooners and the Alabama Crimson Tide both with 7 draft picks, which I think is pretty good considering we didn't have a player selected until the back end of the second round. Coincidentally enough, is the same spot Creed Humphrey was selected last year, ended up being considered one of the best centers in the game in 2022. And that was Nik Bonitto coming off the board at number 64 overall, the last pick of the second round, to the Denver Broncos. After him, just a couple picks later in the third round, was Brian Asamoah at pick number 66 to the Minnesota Vikings. At 108, and we'll talk about this one here in a little bit, Perion Winfrey goes pick 108 of the 4th round to the Cleveland Browns. Then you got Delarin Turner going pick 152 of the 5th round to the Denver Broncos. Michael Woods, to me, this is a bit of a surprise, going to the Cleveland Browns at pick number 202. And then Isaiah Thomas also going to the Cleveland Browns at number 223. And then you had Marquise Hayes going 257 to the Arizona Cardinals. And then you got a host of undrafted free agents, we'll talk about here in a little bit. But kind of overall, I don't know if there's a ton of surprise, at least in where Nik Bonitto went, right? Like, we kind of figured he was going to be going somewhere in the second round, possibly late, maybe early third, and he ends up going late second round.
Yeah, that was right in the neighborhood of what we expected for Nik Bonitto. Honestly, if he was a third-round selection, wasn't going to be all that much of a surprise, just because, again, you're sort of drafting a little bit at this stage of the game, maybe a specialist in terms of Nik Bonitto, pass rushing specialist, maybe some of the other things. If you're thinking about Nik Bonitto next level as an outside linebacker, then that's going to take some growing with Nik Bonitto. So for that reason alone, maybe thought, okay, third round, and really, quite frankly, it wouldn't have been a huge shock. It would have been disappointing, but I don't think it would have been a huge shock if it was a 4th round selection for Nik Bonitto. But listen, he's such a great pass rusher, and this is what we talked about leading into this draft. I told you just based on, I told the royal you, all of you fine Sooner fans out there, that he's such a great pass rusher that just on that fact alone, you got to take this guy if you get the opportunity to take them. And obviously the Denver Broncos right there, tail end of the second round. I think it's a good fit for Nik Bonitto to go to a place in Denver that has that history. And, you could probably say this about a lot of different places in the National Football League where everybody's got that one really, really good pass rushing specialist. But, Von Miller in recent memory was such a great player in that regard in the Mile High City. So I can see some Von Miller type traits. Maybe that's a little extreme for Nik Bonitto to make that Von Miller comparison, but just strictly in his ability to get to the passer, there are some Von Miller type traits there for Bonitto. So I like the fit for him.
Yeah, I like the fit for him a lot as well. He's not expected to go in and be the primary pass rusher, the guy that they're expecting to get 10, 12 sacks in the season. They've got Bradley Chubb. He's a really good player. They signed Randy Gregory in free agency. He's a solid player as well. So Nik Bonitto can be, like you're talking about, he can be a guy that just comes in passing situations and they just say, hey, go get the quarterback. Don't worry about defending the run. And then as he kind of works along into his rookie season or maybe even into his second year, they can start requiring a little bit more of him in the run game because he showed at Oklahoma that he was a really good run defender too. And his versatility allows him to be somebody that can drop in coverage from time to time just to throw defenses or throw opposing offenses off. And so I like the fit as well. I think that's really good. One of the big takeaways I had from this draft, and just kind of turning the page a little bit, was how many Sooners ended up playing with other former Sooners or pairing together in this draft class. I mean, the Cleveland Browns drafted 3 Oklahoma Sooners. Are they just trying to make up for the way that the whole Baker Mayfield thing has gone down? I mean, they're not really, but in jest, it just feels like that. Like, hey, we're really sorry about Baker Mayfield. Hey, we'll just take a few of these Sooners to kind of make up for it and pair on Winfrey, Isaiah Thomas, and Michael Woods. I don't know. It was just really kind of fun. And, Marquise goes to Arizona where Marquise Brown and Kyler Murray were. I mean, that's guys that he played with. He's been a starter for Oklahoma for several years now. Jeremiah Hall is going to go play with Sterling Shepard. Grant Calcaterra and Kennedy Brooks are going to go play in Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts. Guys reuniting all over the place. It's just, I don't know, it's just really fun. And then you got Brian Asamoah going up to Minnesota, and it's like, okay, guess I'm going to just go up here by myself.
Solo Viking for Brian Asamoah.
That's right.
No, that is interesting how it played out in that regard, to where a couple of franchises, obviously, in this draft class really like themselves some Sooners. You talk about, well, I'll save that because we're probably going to dive into biggest surprise from this draft for Oklahoma. Just talking specifically about, guys winding up in the same city for the same franchise. I think it's, great in terms of the comfort level. Bonitto and De'Aaron Turner-Yell both together in Denver. The trio of guys going to Cleveland, that's fantastic. That comfort level that you get to come into the National Football League with, assuming that everybody sticks around, right? It's not totally out of place for somebody to, even with the, 5th, 6th round draft picks, spend that draft pick on somebody and then doesn't necessarily totally make it out of camp onto the roster. So that's, not a guarantee at this point, but it does look like a trio of guys going to Cleveland. And whether or not that's, hey, we kind of like this Oklahoma City market and what it's, meant for the Cleveland Browns, or if it's even a little bit of, hey, how about that sticking it to Baker Mayfield a little bit. I don't think there's any of that involved.
No,
I'm totally playing around here, but obviously they, found themselves, the Cleveland Browns, a trio of Sooners that they thought they got at, a quote unquote good asking price at different junctures of the draft. So it's good for all of those guys that they've got some familiarity.
Yeah, they got great value there with several of those guys. And we'll talk more about biggest surprise. We got several more takeaways. But first, I want to talk about Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market. You will not be disappointed. Summer's coming, and with summer, you're going to need some extra food on the go. And Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on your family vacations. Just throw them in your bag, in your kids' backpacks. Make sure that everyone has a bar so you're fueled for your summer adventures. The best part about Built Bars, they're healthy and delicious. No more sacrificing delicious food for health. With Built Bar, you can have both, and it's easy. All you have to do is go to Built.com and order right now. Get 100% covered in chocolate Built Bars. And they've got great flavors like banana cream pie, raspberry, double chocolate, and so many more, like my favorite, the peanut butter brownie. So go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order over at built.com. And thank you so much for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're so thankful that you're with us. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube as well. Josh, all right, biggest surprise of the NFL draft. I'm just going to pose this question first to you, and then we can continue to talk about surprises as far as the Oklahoma Sooners are concerned. And that is Perrion Winfrey going in the 4th round to the Cleveland Browns, or Kennedy Brooks not being drafted at all and having to sign an undrafted free agent contract.
Unfortunately for Kennedy Brooks, it's a bigger surprise that Perrion Winfrey fell to the 4th round after what happened with him. Talking Perrion Winfrey at the Senior Bowl, where he was tremendous all week long. It seemed like any NFL analyst that you could find out there talking about the Senior Bowl was raving about what Perrion Winfrey did that week. So that was more surprising to me. Perrion Winfrey, though, in the 4th round, I don't think that's the biggest surprise overall for Oklahoma in this NFL draft. I think the biggest surprise for me was Denver taking De'Aaron Turner-Yell in the 5th round. I thought that was a pleasant surprise for Oklahoma. For somebody in DTY that we kind of thought, okay, maybe 6th round, maybe 7th round, possibly like Kennedy Brooks goes the undrafted free agent route. Instead, for Denver to take DTY when they did, I thought that was the biggest surprise in a positive way for Oklahoma in this draft.
Yeah, as things were kind of getting towards the draft day, it just seemed more and more like DTY was going to get drafted. I mean, he was having 30 visits with different teams and one specifically with Detroit. And so I was really excited to see him get picked in the 5th. Just a great dude. Just really, I think he's going to thrive because he's a film junkie. He wants to be watching film. When I interviewed him for Sooners Wire back in February, I asked him, hey, what are you doing with your free time? He's like, I'm watching film. I'm getting ready for the draft. I'm like, no, seriously. Like, are you you play video? Like, no, I watch film. I've got the tablet. I've got my iPad. On the couch, checking film out, getting ready for interviews, getting ready for meetings, and during the season, I'm getting ready for games. But I'm watching film, and then I'm falling asleep on the couch watching film. So I'm ecstatic for that dude. I think again, Denver is a great place for him because they've got such a rich history with safety play. And I think he can fit in really, really well there as a box safety. The surprise for me, though, was Mike Woods. Like, I going into last year, I felt like he was a guy that was going to have a really, really productive year. We've talked about it several times on this show with the way that they rotated the wide receivers. It didn't really give anybody the opportunity to stand out head and shoulders above anybody else. It was just kind of like a wide receiver by committee approach. And for the most part, it kind of worked, but nobody really had these eye-popping numbers. And Michael Woods was one of those guys that he had an okay season, but not a ton of production either in his junior year at Arkansas or his senior year at Oklahoma, where you're like, this is definitely a draftable wide receiver. But he does have traits, and he's a pretty athletic guy. He's got solid hands. He's a good route runner. He can make things happen after the catch, and he's a willing blocker. And so it definitely gave some teams enough to be like, yeah, we'll take a chance on this guy and potentially make him, 4th, 5th wide receiver on our roster, or at least give him the opportunity. So that was a bit of a surprise for me to see him to get drafted. I did feel like there were going to be anywhere from 7 to 9 Sooners drafted in this draft. So kind of falling right where that was not so surprising. I was surprised that Kennedy Brooks didn't get picked just because of his production level. The only other Oklahoma Sooner to have 3,000 yards rushing and average 7 yards per carry in their career was Billy Sims. Billy Sims and Kennedy Brooks, and the only people to do that. So it did surprise me that he didn't get drafted, even as a 6th, 7th round pick. But it gets kind of weird down there in the draft, and who knows what teams are thinking of his physical ability and why they didn't take him. But I think he's going to be a guy that vastly outperforms his draft stock. And I like his landing spot in Philadelphia, where not only does he get to play with Jalen Hurts, but he's going to have an opportunity to earn touches because Miles Sanders is a really good back, but he's somebody who's oft injured. Like, he's not necessarily somebody who's known for being durable. And so Kennedy Brooks will have a good chance to make an impact even in his rookie year as an undrafted free agent, I think. let's turn the page a little bit, unless you have anything else you want to add on something that surprised you from an Oklahoma Sooners perspective or just from the draft itself.
Just bouncing off a couple of the items that you mentioned there, Mike Woods, to me, he reminds me, and this is because I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan, so I watch a lot of the Kansas City Chiefs games. He reminds me a lot of Byron Pringle, and I think I've mentioned that here in the past, where at times deceptive speed, got, good route running skills, better size, I think, than maybe we give him credit for. And he's at times a pretty good big play threat, deep ball threat. So I can see what Cleveland's thinking a little bit that, okay, 6th round pick, let's take a chance on this guy and see how this thing works out. Kennedy Brooks, really hope it works out for him in Philadelphia, because I don't know who necessarily to compare Kennedy Brooks to. I mean, obviously just the statistical stuff that you pointed out there with Billy Sims. I mean, that's amazing when you think about the parallel between those two guys. And obviously Kennedy Brooks winds up as an undrafted free agent here to Philadelphia. I hope it works out for him. I don't know who to compare him to, just, physically from pass running backs in the NFL. But I think that even though he's not that flashy type runner, at some point, man, I think, and I get it, in the world of the NFL draft, we get caught up in measurables, right? What's your 40 time look like? What's your vertical, on and on and on, all these different things that you would look at to evaluate a running back. Kennedy Brooks produces, man. And at the end of the day, if you're somebody that can go out there and average 7 yards per carry, okay, he's not going to do that in the National Football League. But if he's averaging anywhere, north of 4 yards per carry, he's going to stick around somewhere. And I hope that somewhere is in Philadelphia.
And one note that one of our writers over at Sooners Wire mentioned in a piece he wrote on Kennedy Brooks earlier today was that he didn't lose a fumble in college, which is amazing to me. Like, for as many carries as he got over the course of 3-4 seasons, that he never lost a fumble. That's just mind-boggling, because everybody fumbles at least once, right? It's just surprising to me. All right, one more note because we hadn't touched on this yet. I kind of touched on it earlier, but Marquise Brown getting traded to Arizona, leaves Baltimore, goes to Arizona. Arizona sends a first back to Baltimore, reunites with Kyler Murray in the 2018 season, when Kyler Murray won the Heisman Trophy. Marquise Brown had 75 receptions, more than 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns. This is a great fit. I mean, Marquise Brown has kind of had an up and down career with Baltimore, but he gets to go to a quarterback that he knows, he loves. They're great friends. How excited are you just for Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown to be playing together again?
It sounds like Marquise Brown is who was really kind of requesting the trade and everything too. So It sounds like Hollywood Brown is getting what Hollywood Brown wants, which, hey, you got the nickname of Hollywood. You kind of got a superstar mentality. You should get every once in a while a little bit of what you want. I love it. I think obviously, Marquise Brown has shown that he can be a dynamic playmaker in the National Football League. Injuries at times, both in college, we know that. And then, in the professional level, that's held him back a little bit. So hopefully Kyler Murray, we know, how much stock do you want to put into was it agent talk, or was Kyler Murray legitimately a little bit frustrated with the way last season ended and didn't feel like he had enough toys around him and weapons around him? Well, he's got a familiar toy and weapon around him now in Marquise Hollywood Brown. And, Hollywood has shown, again, that he can be an explosive wide receiver in the National Football League. So you talk about familiarity. That seems to be kind of the theme coming out of this NFL draft, and just the weekend of the NFL draft, if you mix in, obviously, Hollywood Brown here, of just these familiar Oklahoma faces reuniting. So it should be a good marriage, we hope, down there in Arizona. And I think, Kyler's already shown us that he is a superstar, a budding superstar in this National Football League. So I like it. I didn't dislike Hollywood Brown in Baltimore. I'm maybe higher on Lamar Jackson than some of the scuttlebutt you hear out there from other people. Okay, is he the most dynamic passer in the world? No, he's not. But he's one of the most dynamic playmakers in the world that is the National Football League. And a couple of playoff losses don't scare me away one bit with Lamar Jackson. So I loved that situation for Hollywood Brown. But clearly, if you're in the business of kind of passing along to management that you want to trade, then maybe you're not totally happy with it. So hopefully it works out for all parties.
Yeah, it sounded like Marquise was just not thrilled with being in a run-first offense or a run-heavy offense, if we could say that, because it's been a great offense for Mark Andrews. Like he's thrived in Baltimore and is now kind of considered in that upper echelon of tight ends in the NFL, along with Travis Kelce and George Kittle. He's in that same tier. And so it's a good offense and it's a strong offense, but maybe it's not one that can highlight what Marquise Brown does best, and that's get down the field, get over the top, going to a place where Kyler Murray's got a great arm, great deep ball, and he's not going to be the focal point on the outside because they've got DeAndre Hopkins. It's going to be drawing a lot of coverage. It's going to provide a lot of opportunities for Marquise Brown, I think, especially down the field. And it'll open things up for DeAndre Hopkins as well, because people will have to respect the speed that Hollywood brings to the table. So got a few more draft takeaways to cover, especially why is Texas such a poverty school? We'll talk about that after I talk about BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all of the latest sports development, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, Josh. Texas doesn't have a single player drafted in the 2022 NFL draft. One of three schools in the Big 12, the other two were Kansas State and West Virginia, that didn't have a player drafted. Oh, yes, the Kansas Jayhawks did. They had one player drafted in the 2022 NFL draft. So, you look at the SEC and how many players were taken out of the SEC. And according to CBS Sports, it was 65. So 30 more players than the Big 12, 30 more than the Pac-12, 17 more than the Big 10, and 24 more than the SEC. Wait, sorry, I'm doing bad math. 40 more players than the Big 12. 40 more. Sorry, this is not a math show. This is a sports show. But 40 more players than the Big 12 were selected. You look at the recruiting rankings, Josh. All 14 SEC teams are in the top 32 of 247 Sports team rankings. How many Big 12 teams? Just 3. So what does it say about the SEC? They're getting the talent, and that talent's getting to the NFL. The Big 12 is getting talent, and some of the teams like Oklahoma, who had the 5th most draft picks this year, they're getting talent to the NFL as well. But the conference as a whole, it just isn't seen in the same light. And yes, the SEC has more schools. I'll grant that. But they don't have so many more schools that they can have 40 more draft picks than the Big 12. I mean, we're also looking at teams like, Kentucky. They had 4 draft picks. Arkansas with 3. Mississippi State with 2. Missouri with 2. Auburn with 1. I mean, everybody, it looks like, except for Vanderbilt, had somebody picked. It's just, I think that shows why this move to the SEC is so big for Oklahoma. I mean, Oklahoma is going to do fine, but this just takes their ability to get talent and produce NFL talent to another level, because they're going to get more 4- and 5-star players, and they're going to take those 4- and 5-star players and develop them into players that can get to the NFL level, just continuing to create that talent cycle that's going to benefit the program, not just now, but in the future as well.
I think raw numbers, obviously, that you're looking at there, the totality of players that were SEC players that got drafted versus, the total drafted players from the Big 12. Okay, that's a massive disparity. But to me, the more alarming thing, John, is back-to-back years, no Big 12 player selected in the first round. I mean, that tells you and then I don't have the number of SEC players drafted in the first round. I think it was more than a dozen. That just tells you not only is there a conference-wide talent disparity, but in terms of an annual basis, and certainly each of the last 2 years basis, there's a pretty serious talent disparity just in terms of the overall NFL draft talent in those two respective conferences. So that to me, I mean, save this for a later day. Grab your sticky note, jot it down, put it over there in the corner of the office, John, and we'll revisit this at some point during the summer. But maybe this leap to the SEC, maybe we're taking this thing for granted a little bit. I don't want to give everybody out there that's saying, oh, this is the end of Oklahoma. I don't want to give all of that too much credit, but maybe there is a level of us taking for granted, okay, this is going to be a significant step up in terms of talent week in and week out. I mean, just the NFL draft results this year. I think they tell us that. In the last two NFL drafts, I think they tell us that when the Big 12, and I get it's a little bit cyclical here, but I mean, come on. There's not one player from the Big 12 good enough to get drafted in the first round. I mean, that to me is a little bit alarming. And Texas, okay, you take it away and we can dive into this. Are you kidding me, Texas? Pathetic.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you're supposed to be a premier college football power. You're supposed to be. You're supposed to be back. You're supposed to have a wizard in Steve Sarkisian. Now, they're going to have at least two players taken in the top 60 picks next year, and Bijan Robinson and maybe Xavier Worthy won't even be draft eligible next year. It might be the year after that he'll be draft eligible. And so, I mean, Bijan next year, he'll be a top 60 pick. But beyond that, like, who else? Like, who else is going to be a top 60 pick out of Texas? But to not get any players drafted is just ridiculous for a team that is supposed to be as good as they are. It makes you understand why they have to throw cash at offensive linemen to get them to come to Texas. Like, because you're not developing players. And this has been the root of their problem for a decade or more, is that they just don't develop the players that they're getting in the recruiting rankings, because they're generally a top 10, top 5 team as far as recruiting rankings go over the last decade. To not be able to take those players and get them to the next level is just a travesty. And you think that they're going to get better, and they think they're going to get better. But right now, the last 10, 14 years, 15 years of history shows that they're not really getting better. And again, it's a one-off year. Things are weird, and they had a big transition, last year with the hiring of Steve Sarkisian. But not one player drafted. Like, you first got beat by Kansas in the regular season, and then Kansas beat you again with number of draft picks in the NFL draft. I mean, it's to me, again, it's mind-boggling. And then you look at the teams in the Big 12 that did have players drafted. I mean, Oklahoma State had 3. Texas Tech had 2. Texas Tech had 2. And Kansas State had 2. Like, I get Baylor's going to have a ton of draft picks. They were a really good team last year. I get Iowa State is going to have draft picks because they had a lot of talent. That's why people expected them to be really good. Again, Texas didn't have one. Like, what are you doing? Are your guys just not testable? Are they not testing well to get people to draft them? I mean, again, we had a guy that had like 30-something receptions get drafted from Oklahoma, and Michael Woods. We had a guy coming off of a season where he was kind of injury-plagued, and Delaran Turner-Yell get drafted. I don't know. I mean, and Oklahoma could have had several more players drafted. So, Texas will probably make me eat my words next year when they have several players drafted that, we might not be expecting. But yeah, it's got to be embarrassing if you're that school.
Well, I don't think that they are going to make you eat your words, because there's no changing the fact that they didn't have somebody drafted in this draft. Like, okay, so each year you can't, unless you're Alabama probably, or occasionally in recent memory, a Clemson or an Ohio State, maybe you're not going to have 8 players drafted every single draft, but 1, and you're the University of Texas, and you're the flagship university, so we're told, in that state, which is regarded as the greatest high school football state in the country. And I'm not saying that there's anything to, make fun of from the state of Texas high school football. It's a serious thing. It's a big deal. I get that. There's a ton of talent in the state of Texas. And if that's the case, though, I'm sorry, you're right there. You're Texas. You're in the state of California. You're in the state of Florida. You're in the state of Georgia. There's no excuse to have a single season where you don't have one player drafted. Inexcusable for them. Let's play this game, right? Yeah, we were talking recruiting rankings. 2018, the number 3 recruiting class. How about 2019? Oh, look at that. The number 3 recruiting class. What about 2020? What was that recruiting class ranked for the University of Texas? Oh, that was a top 10 recruiting class. We could keep going, but you get the drift. You catch the drift here. They're getting top talent, but you said it well. You said it best. It's not getting developed in. coaching change or not, man, I mean, that's pretty alarming for them.
Yeah, because a lot of those players, even though they were under a previous staff, they didn't get that development under the new staff either. And so very, very interesting. A couple notes that couple tweets I want to read that I felt like were really fascinating on this topic. From @RedDirtSport, great follow on Twitter if you're over there on Twitter. The Sooners have had players selected in the last 27 NFL drafts. That's a Big 12 active streak. The Longhorns have failed to have a draft selection twice in the last decade. 27 straight years for the Oklahoma Sooners to have a draft pick, and Texas has not, or has had 2 seasons or 2 years where they didn't have a draft pick. Yeah, I think that just goes to show just the disparity between the two programs right now.
I think it tells us one other thing too. I think it tells us that the folks in the National Football League, they believe in the development that's going on at the University of Oklahoma versus they don't believe in the development that's going on from the University of Texas. It's because let's call it what it is. There's a couple of Sooners that got drafted that could have been undrafted free agents. Mm-hmm. Instead, they got their opportunity in the NFL as a drafted player because guess what? There's a lot of respect for what's been going on, though we haven't always said the nicest things, perhaps, about some of the previous coaching regime and some of the assistant coaches that were a part of that. Look, there's a lot of respect, and it's clear that there's a lot of respect in what's going on in Norman versus there's not a ton of respect, at least yet, in what's been going on in Austin.
Okay, and then the last nugget comes from the legend, the great Bill Bedenbaugh himself. Big 12 offensive linemen drafted in the last 5 years. At the top, number 1, Oklahoma at 7. TCU, 3. Texas, Texas Tech, and West Virginia, 2. Kansas, Kansas State, Oklahoma State with just 1. And Baylor and Iowa State at 0 offensive linemen drafted in the last 5 years. So just further evidence of Oklahoma's dominance in their ability to get players, get top talent, develop those top talents, and get them to the NFL level. So if you're a prospect and you're out there listening to the show and you're hoping that you can make a transition, make the jump to the next level after college, Oklahoma is going to be your best bet if you're looking at a Big 12 school. So, Josh, any other thoughts on the 2022 NFL draft before we wrap it up tonight?
I've got some other thoughts that maybe we can dive into in our next show on Perrion Winfrey. And I'll just a little bit of a sample, a little bit of a tease. I don't think we should have been totally shocked that Perrion had the plummet that he had in this NFL draft. And I'll leave it at that.
And we'll talk about that more on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Sooners. Make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Josh on Twitter @JoshOnRef. You can also hear him from 9 to noon, Monday through Friday on 94.7 The Ref in Norman, 1400 Sports Talk in Oklahoma City. Follow me on Twitter @John9Williams. Check out the work over at SoonersWire.com. And until next time, he's Josh. I'm John. Boomer Sooner.